Jesse, welcome. You have a really interesting idea as it pertains to getting masks into the United States of America to help with the coronavirus pandemic. Introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about the solution that you've come up with.
Yeah, good to be on, David. So my name is Jesse.Koltes. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer of a food and beverage company called Life. I started the company about 5 years ago, and I've hand arranged the entire supply chain from raw ingredients to manufacturing to distribution. And I sell my products to Costco, Kroger, Walmart, 8,000 grocery stores approximately. And I still operate the supply chain every day, so I have a good grasp of the details. And when I heard about the PPE shortage in New York, I just figured, this is the kind of problem I solve all the time. Let's dive in and find the hard edge. And if I can't solve it, then that's that. But if I keep solving it, I'll just keep moving forward. And it seems that I haven't found the hard edge yet. I don't see why we can't get these in.
What do you mean by the hard edge?
When you're trying to find or solve a supply chain problem, you just have to theorize it in your mind and then try and execute on each sub step until your theory is proven wrong. And that would be the hard edge. Like the reason you can't get physical good A to place Y is the hard edge. And I, for the life of me, have not found one yet with the masks.
Yeah, so when we first spoke about this, basically what you said was you had heard that, and correct me if I get anything wrong, you said that you had heard that there were masks being made in China, then those masks could have been shipped here. They weren't being shipped here for a reason. And you said there's something about this which seems weird. Talk about that. And the word that you used was bottleneck. So what was the bottleneck that people think there is that you're actually seeing, hey, there actually might not be this bottleneck?
Right. So the two pieces of information that started my search were I live in New York City and I know and have hospital workers in my family, and they're reporting this PPE shortage or very low inventory levels. And then they're like, isn't it amazing we can't get them from China? I called my Chinese factory that I work with every week and said, how many surgical masks could you make? And he said 2 million this week. And I said, okay, then maybe the problem or the hard edge or the bottleneck is importing. So I said, ship me some. And he shipped me some last week. They arrived in LA. They're surgical masks. And so now I've got surgical masks in LA that just need to get to New York. I haven't found the bottleneck. When I started to dig deeper, what I think the bottleneck is actually trust. So the fact that a lot of these hospitals have never directly sourced from China before, there's all sorts of slight complications that would prevent them from making a purchase order because they have a lot of career risk about looking wrong, and they probably have medical liability about importing bad stuff, which is all standard. And then, of course, the pandemic cranks this up to 11 because you can't fly over there and validate it, right? So it's a trust issue. And what I'm doing with the fundraising is if I coordinate the whole supply chain myself, the only people all parties have to trust is me. And if I crowdfund capital, you can use charity like venture capital through one person to solve the trust problem and link buyers and sellers. And so that's what we've been doing for about 3 days. And, the wonderful thing about moving fast is if you raise a flag and say you're doing something, a lot of interesting people come to your aid. And so it just it's building up a lot of momentum, and I think it's going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're doing here. We're planting the flag. You've been working on this for 3 days. Ordinarily, that wouldn't be nearly long enough, but time is of the essence here. And even though this is a problem that you've only been focused on for a couple weeks, you have years of experience with supply chains and existing relationships with Chinese manufacturers, which makes this very interesting to me. So when you say charity is venture capital, that implies that there's some risk involved. Talk about that risk. Why can't you just go out, raise an $100,000 fund or a $1 million fund, say, I'm going to return this money and guarantee that you're going to get those shipped in? Talk about the risk involved. That's not quite clear to me.
Right. So, well, take it back a few years ago before I placed my first order from China. The way that works is you meet somebody, usually through a broker in China, and you develop a relationship and you do your due diligence and you try and figure out who they are. But at some point, you wire money to Asia. And until the physical goods show up, you really don't know if you're going to get them. And it is very hard to separate, the reality from the promise in normal times. And so building new supply chain relationships to Asia in a time of pandemic is extremely difficult. So basically you have to maximize the old relationships you have. And even then, if you do create a new relationship with a factory in China, you still have the risk I had, which is at some point someone presses a button, that money gets wired to Asia, and you don't know if you're going to get your stuff. And so there's literally a leap of trust that has to happen. And when there's a shortage, every day that you work to like resolve or build up more trust is a day you're not getting the stuff in.
So, how could we mitigate that risk, or is that risk just going to be there? Is there a way to have that be something that you send and then it has a holding period until you actually get the masks? Or are you just saying fundamentally you have to trust me, I have these relationships? And one more question is, if you know these manufacturers through selling bone broth, how are they able to make masks right away? Is it that easy to shift a manufacturing line, or is this part of the same general corporate entity that then is being shifted and they own multiple different kinds of machines?
Right. So the first thing about risk, there are things you can do to reduce the risk, right? You can put money in escrow. You can put 30% down and pay net 70 on the invoice when it arrives in the United States. Those are the normal ways you trade with Asia, is like escrow and splitting up payments to build trust. The Chinese are getting so many orders right now, and they're from so many new people. Their terms in the market right now are basically 100% down. That's what they're asking. So the normal ways you would build trust through credit or escrow slow this process down, which is why it's not a good fit. So I do think there's risk that really can't go away. And I think that's why you have to pair that risk with the right form of capital, which is, in this case, I think charity or venture capital, or someone really rich that thinks they could handle the loss. And it does sound now like some entrepreneurial state leaders are cutting checks, which is a big difference than the way they normally do business, knowing that, hey, maybe this could be fraud. Like, we have to try, even though maybe I'm going to fund a little bit of fraudulent behavior. And then the second point, my Chinese factories are packaging facilities. And so they were fairly capable to switch over to making surgical masks. It's not the same problem as making a ventilator when you used to make bone broth components before. That's a much tougher problem. I'm starting with the surgical masks, but through the same corporate entity, there are also access to KN95 masks, which is the Chinese version of the N95 3M respirator. So I'm starting with max trust, max ease to try and prove the whole thing out. Once I've donated masks to New York and I can say literally every phase of the supply chain has been executed, there should be trust, like we've done it. You can move up the chain of difficulty, or at least that's my plan.
So just to recap, the fundamental issue here is one of trust, where people could take this risk, but they would be worried about being fired or something like that. And hospitals, in order to purchase these mass orders, they generally need years of existing relationships. Therefore, due to the incentives of the system and the people within it, we need an independent person like yourself to go out, purchase those masks. And so what this project is raising an initial $50,000 fund to get those masks from China, bear some of the risk that because you're paying 100% down, those masks don't actually come into China. But this is the big secret, that trust is the fundamental issue, and hospitals don't have the levels of trust that they need in order to make these purchases. So these masks exist, people need them, and we have a constraint of trust and finances given to people who already have these existing relationships. Is that right?
That's right. There are a couple more frictions that make it even riskier that I understand people without supply chain backgrounds get worried about. One of them is import risk. What are the Chinese going to do when the stuff is on the airport tarmac about to leave? That's a real risk. It probably can be mitigated by just labeling this sort of anonymously, right? So like I typically ship in industrial goods. So my manufacturer is an industrial goods supplier. So as practice, don't label our stuff medical grade on the outside. That could be an issue, but I mean, if you're a hospital, they might be a little worried about that sort of slight underhanded behavior, which I don't, if I'm donating, I don't think I have any risk of that. Like at the very least, someone else can use them if they weren't labeled perfectly when I get them through customs. And then there's quality risk, right? So if this is for a really complicated piece of equipment like a ventilator, obviously it has to work. And so I sympathize with the hospitals about wanting to know exactly what the quality is. And I have heard of large state level deals falling through because very small Swiss third party auditors can't fly to China to prove to a big buyer that it is what they say it is. Hmm. So in the absence of that, because of the pandemic, I think that risk just has to be borne.
What are some of the other risks? So you're seeing a risk in terms of quality standards. You're seeing a risk in terms of what happens at tarmac. Do we have any issues with the American government seizing the masks as they come in when they get to LA or probably Long Beach at the port?
Yeah, I just read a story about the FBI stopping doctors in Massachusetts with truckloads of PPE because they worried there was price gouging. I think our economist friends would have lots of interesting things to say about the government trying to interfere in markets when price gouging would actually solve supply and demand gaps, but leave that for another guest. But the federal government is actively trying to stop price gouging. So the way I'm combating that is by saying I'm never going to make $1 from this. I think that puts me in a pretty good position to prove that I'm not a price gouger. But that is another friction. Like if you are trying to import, say, hand sanitizer or face masks from China, I think you should be worried about the FBI being concerned about price gouging. That is a risk. So I've heard some other entrepreneurs say, oh, we're only going to mark this up 10%, but 10% over what? I mean, the market clearing price is really high right now, and I would be concerned about being taken to court over price gouging later.
Okay, so say that we get past these risks and these masks end up in your hands. What happens with the masks? Do you have any relationships with hospitals in America? How do you decide who actually gets these masks? What is going to happen? And what does the future of this project look like? What's the incentive for you to keep going besides the good willingness of your heart if it sounds like you're not going to make any money from this?
Right. I mean, this is so the plan on donation is most of the hospitals in New York City where I live have open emails about how you can make donations. So the easiest thing to do is just work with existing donation channels and then try and leverage a proven donation into a stronger relationship, level up the trust that way. One interesting note about the donation thing, of the hospitals in New York that I've been in communication with, the donation emails are being manned by residents who are obviously very busy right now. And they mostly have said, if you have physical goods, we can donate, we can arrange when you can come donate them. But they're not able to have a conversation with me and where I can explain that if they gave me money up front, I can get them a ton more masks from China. They're just like, when it's here, we'll help you donate it, which is why I'm kind of back solving all the issues they can't worry about. And if I just donate them, that's success, right? We got it in. But I need it to kickstart a stronger relationship to really scale it up, right? So if we get some history of success, every media organization I've talked to has said, basically, we'll cover it when you can prove it, which is another reason the GoFundMe gets me somewhere I can't get without it, right? Like if I donate, let's just say 100,000 surgical masks, and it's me driving the box truck up to a hospital in Queens, you take a photo of that and you have pretty good proof that you did it, right? That helps you get more media. I hope I can make contact with someone at Cuomo's office. I will say one interesting anecdote on the trust issue. I was speaking with a large, friendly Chinese supplier of PPE. That supplier lives on the Upper West Side of New York City. He claims he has reached out to Cuomo and de Blasio's office for weeks and cannot get anyone to call him back. So there is a level of disarray here where you need a middleman to establish the trust, even if it seems weird that a bone broth supply chain expert is the one doing it. If anyone can do it, it's helpful because the normal parties that should connect are just, for whatever reason, not able to connect right now.
So it sounds like what we're trying to do is we're just trying to spin something up. Very similar. You're using the charity as venture capital. very similar. What we're trying to do is basically raise a seed round for this project, get the project going. Then we are only raising $50,000 because we want to see if it works, but we need $50,000 to prove that this works on a significant scale. Then we're going to go through the aforementioned risks, get them into America, ship them from the West Coast to the East Coast. You will get them in the hands of a hospital that you already have relationships with on the Upper East Side in New York City. You'll take a photo of those masks, prove that this works. Then we will go out, we'll get media coverage from our success, and then we'll see this as something that is going and continuing. But we need to get the first series of masks to hospitals in New York for this to work, to prove that this can be done. And not only will this project take off, but we believe that once we can show that this works, maybe other projects will happen like this too. So basically what there is right now is there's a big stagnation. There's a big, nothing is happening right now. There's a stasis. And so what we want to do is we want to prove that the mask shortage is a function of circumstance, not of necessity. And we want to show that you have found the secret, found the thing that everybody else is looking for, and together pool resources in order to get this project underway.
That's right. It's just a little drop of organizational capital, and you can get these parties collaborating, and the ultimate goal is to get me out of it, right? I mean, if I can teach if I can teach a hospital administrator in Queens how to directly source, and I can prove there's no risk, I mean, I can write a one-page procedure and then I can step back. I mean, I don't have to be involved for very long. I just have to prove it can work once.
Absolutely. So tell us before we close, if I want to get involved, how can I help? I've already contributed to the GoFundMe. This is something that I'm working on too. I'm trying to get eyeballs on this, trying to get reach. But if I can help by giving money, if I can help by giving time, how can we contact you and how can we support this project financially?
Yeah, so I've set up a GoFundMe, which David mentioned you generously donated to. The GoFundMe is the way to financially help me out. I can be reached through email, jesse@lonalife.com. I'm on Twitter as the Charlieton. The thing that is most helpful right now is capital. And if you are a Chinese manufacturer that is having trouble getting in touch, please contact me. And then logistics partners. There is a real friction right now with there's not as many flights as there were between China and the United States as there was a month ago. And sea freight doesn't solve the problem right now. So I do have good contacts with logistics companies between China and the United States, but that could be a bottleneck. So if you know something about that, would love to hear from you.
Great. All those links will be in the description of this video on YouTube. We will have a written summary. We will have directions on how to contact Jesse and myself. So if you know anything about this or if you'd like to contribute, we'd love your help. And thank you so much, Jesse.
Appreciate it, David. Thanks.